Before GPS, parental controls, and bottled water, there was chaos. Glitter shirts, no helmets, and shag on every surface. They weren't safe, but they were unforgettable. It's Memory Surge. My name is Kevin, and we reveal the 30 funny things about the 1970s we all experienced. Let's get to it, right after you subscribe, of course. Riding bikes until dark with no helmets and no phones. You weren't a real 70s kid unless you disappeared on a bike and came back at sunset, sunburned, scraped, and starving. No helmet, no phone, no idea where you were half the time. And somehow, nobody panicked. You pedaled hard, jumped curbs, and used your foot as a brake when the pads wore off. If you had gears, great. If not, gravity did the work. Your GPS was a friend yelling from 2 blocks away. Your emergency contact was someone's older brother. Streetlights meant the day was done. You made it home sweaty, bruised, and buzzing from Kool-Aid and near-death experiences. It wasn't safe. It wasn't smart, but it was pure freedom, and we all survived, somehow. Lava lamps. They didn't light the room, they hypnotized it. Lava lamps were less about brightness and more about staring into a slow, bubbling blob of mystery. You turned it on, waited an hour, then watched wax float like it had deep thoughts. It didn't. But that didn't stop you from zoning out like it held the secrets of the universe. They came in purple, orange, red, and colors that never matched your furniture, but always matched your mood. The base got hot enough to fry an egg. The goo moved just slow enough to test your patience. Nobody knew how they worked. Nobody cared. They were weird. They were useless. They were everywhere. And somehow, we all thought they were cool. Beanbag chairs. Beanbag chairs weren't designed, they just happened. No frame, no shape, no real plan. You flopped, rolled, and somehow landed sideways no matter how you started. Sitting upright? Impossible. Standing up? A full-body event. Once you went in, you stayed until gravity got bored. The vinyl stuck to your legs in summer. The beans made that soft crunch every time you shifted. And if one ripped, game over. White pellets exploded like confetti, floated into vents, and haunted your house forever. But they were cheap, fun, and made you feel like the coolest kid on the block, even if you needed help standing up. Boom boxes. If your music didn't rattle windows and scare adults, were you even doing it right? The boombox wasn't subtle. It was a statement. 2 speakers, 10 pounds, and enough AA batteries to bankrupt a family. You didn't just carry music. You hauled it like a briefcase full of noise. Buttons clicked with authority. Dials needed muscle. And when you hit play, it wasn't background music. It was your personality, on full blast. Some had double cassette decks. Some had graphic equalizers no one knew how to use. All of them had antennas that poked people by accident. They lived on your shoulders and made you feel powerful. Shag carpeting everywhere. It wasn't flooring. It was a lifestyle choice. Shag carpet didn't just cover the ground, it tried to eat it. Thick, fuzzy, and always in a color that should have been illegal. Burnt orange, avocado, mustard yellow. Like someone spilled the 70s and never cleaned it up. Vacuuming it was a workout. Dropping something meant losing it forever. Coins, toys, snacks, gone without a trace. It crawled upstairs, across walls, sometimes into bathrooms. And when it got wet, game over. It held smells, secrets, and enough dust to build a new carpet. But it felt soft on bare feet, looked cool under lava lamps, and made every house feel like a funky cave you never wanted to leave. Avocado green and harvest gold appliances. Avocado green and harvest gold took over kitchens like a fashion trend no one questioned. Fridges, ovens, mixers, even the trash can wore those colors like a uniform. It was like your appliances were dressed for fall, permanently. They weren't bright. They weren't neutral. They were bold in the weirdest way. And somehow every kitchen had them. Manufacturers swore it was stylish. Homeowners swore it would grow on them. It didn't, but they lasted. Decades later, they still worked, humming away like stubborn relics from a groovy past. You didn't love them, you just accepted them, like wallpaper that wouldn't leave. Bell bottoms. Bell bottoms started normal at the waist, then exploded somewhere below the knee like pants had a secret. They caught wind, dragged through puddles, and jammed into bike chains without warning. Style came with hazards. Denim, corduroy, polyester, didn't matter. As long as they swished when you walked and covered half your shoe, you were doing it right. Parents hated them. Schools banned them. Teenagers wore them tighter. The wider the bell, the louder the attitude. You weren't just walking, you were swaying. Eventually, they vanished. But while they lasted, bell-bottoms turned sidewalks into catwalks, and somehow, nobody questioned it. Platform shoes. Platform shoes gave you height, swagger, and a high risk of twisted ankles. Chunky soles, wild colors, and at least 3 inches of bad decisions under each foot. They clomped across disco floors like bricks in motion. Quiet entrances were impossible. So was balance. Men wore them. Women wore them. Kids begged for them. And everyone wobbled like a newborn deer. You didn't run in platforms. You strutted. Slowly, carefully, stylishly. Blisters were guaranteed. So were compliments. And for one ridiculous moment in fashion history, more height meant more cool, even if you fell down the stairs getting there. Mood rings. You didn't need therapy. You had a ring that read your soul. Mood rings. You didn't need therapy. You had a ring that read your soul. Mood rings promised emotional truth, delivered mostly in shades of purple. You stared at that stone like it held the answer to life. Blue meant calm. Green meant normal. Black meant either stress or frostbite. They were cheap, magical, and wildly inaccurate. But in the 1970s, they felt high-tech. Kids swapped them like candy. Teens wore them like personality badges. Adults pretended not to care, then checked theirs twice an hour. Half the time, your finger was too cold for it to register. The other half, you just made up what it meant. But for a while, your mood came in color, and it looked good doing it. 1970s Zenith Portable Television. It looked like a lunchbox and weighed like a bowling ball. The Zenith Portable TV wasn't really portable, but we carried it anyway. It had a handle, rabbit ears, and a tiny screen that made everything look like a weather report. Black and white most of the time. Fuzz and static the rest. You twisted dials until the picture sort of cleared, then hit the side for good luck. That usually helped. It went to picnics, tailgates, garages, anywhere you needed news, noise, or an excuse to avoid conversation. The batteries died fast. The signal came and went. But when it worked, you felt like a tech genius. Tiny screen, massive pride. Saturday morning cartoons. Saturday morning was sacred, and cartoons were the main event. You woke up early, poured a bowl of sugar disguised as cereal, and planted yourself in front of the TV like it was church. The shows were loud, ridiculous, and borderline chaotic. Talking animals, exploding anvils, and sound effects that lived in your head all week. It wasn't just about laughs. It was ritual. Pajamas on, shoes off, volume up. Parents got to sleep in. Kids got their fill of color, noise, and cereal milk dripping down their chin. By noon, it was over. Back to chores, boredom, and reality. But for those few hours, the world was perfect. Waterbeds. Waterbeds were beds that sloshed. That's it. A giant vinyl sack full of warm water you were somehow supposed to sleep on. They sounded futuristic. They felt like sleeping on a lazy river, and they leaked like it was their job. Rolling over meant waking up. Every move caused a wave. Couples bounced in rhythm or didn't sleep at all. They needed heaters, conditioners, and constant topping off. One tiny tear and your bedroom became a shallow pool. But they were trendy, groovy, modern. Having one meant you had arrived, even if your spine didn't. People bragged about them. Kids jumped on them. Plumbers cursed them. And for a few strange years, water replaced springs. And chaos replaced comfort. Macrame everywhere. Macrame wasn't a hobby. It was a takeover. Plant hangers, wall art, curtain dividers, everything got knotted into something decorative. Living rooms looked like spider webs with ferns. Kitchens had hanging fruit baskets made of rope. Even lampshades weren't safe. It wasn't fast, it wasn't easy, and it definitely wasn't subtle. But once someone started, they couldn't stop. Every knot was a labor of love or boredom. Patterns came from magazines, and half the time, nobody knew what they were making. It shed fibers, collected dust, and stretched under the weight of whatever you put in it. But it made homes feel handmade, even when it just looked tangled. And yes, someone always tried to wear it. Fonzie was the coolest person alive. The Fonz didn't need superpowers. He had a leather jacket, a perfect haircut, and the power to fix jukeboxes with his fist. Every kid wanted his confidence. Every teen tried his stance. Saying "aye" with the right tone practically made you famous at school. He didn't say much, but when he did, it mattered. Thumbs up, head nod, problem solved. Fonzie wasn't just a character on happy days. He was a cultural reset. Cool became a leather-clad science. Even adults watched just to see what he'd do next. He rode a motorcycle indoors and somehow made it make sense. And for one strange moment, cool had a name, and it was Arthur Fonzarelli. 8-track tapes. 8 tracks were clunky, chunky, and absolutely everywhere. If it didn't click into a slot the size of a brick, it wasn't music. You slid it in, heard the loud K-chunk, and hoped it played the right track. Spoiler, it usually didn't. Songs got cut in half. Some restarted mid-verse. Fast forward? Not a chance. You waited or lived with it. The cases melted in hot cars. The tapes jammed constantly. And yet, we loved them. They felt high-tech. Futuristic even. Until cassettes came along and ruined everything by actually working. But for a while, those plastic rectangles ruled the glove box. And if your car had one, you felt like you were driving a spaceship, a very slow one. The bump and the hustle, iconic dances. The bump wasn't a dance. It was an accident you did on purpose. 2 people, 1 hip check, and just enough rhythm to avoid injury. The hustle had more moves, but the same energy, fast feet, finger points, and facial expressions that meant serious business. You didn't need lessons. You needed guts, and maybe a glitter shirt. Disco balls spun overhead while crowds tried to stay in sync. Some did, most didn't, nobody cared. Dance floors turned into bumper cars. Someone always slipped. Someone always yelled, "Do the hustle," like it was a command. It wasn't graceful, it wasn't easy, but if you nailed it, you felt like a star. And if not, well, at least you looked shiny. Disco dancing in glittery outfits. It wasn't a party until someone showed up in a jumpsuit covered in sequins. Disco didn't whisper. It shouted with lights, mirrors, and platform heels. Dance floors lit up beneath your feet. The music thumped like a heartbeat, and suddenly everyone was John Travolta, or at least trying. Outfits were tight, shiny, and questionable. Gold lame, satin shirts unbuttoned to the stomach, and collars wide enough to take flight. The moves were dramatic. Arms pointed, hips rolled, spins attempted, coordination optional, confidence required. You danced for hours, sweat pouring, hair frizzing, rhinestones holding on for dear life. It wasn't about being good. It was about being loud, proud, and in motion. And somehow it worked, at least in the dark. Roller skating rinks. Roller rinks were the original weekend escape. Sticky floors, loud music, flashing lights, and the constant threat of falling in front of your crush. You laced up stiff, rental skates that smelled like gym socks and hoped they'd carry you through one full lap without disaster. Disco beats blasted from every corner. Lights swirled across the ceiling. And somewhere in the chaos, you figured out how to glide without looking terrified. There was always that one kid who skated backward like a pro. The rest of us clung to the wall, arms flailing, hoping not to break anything. Snack bars sold nachos and warm soda. The DJ took requests that never played, but it didn't matter. For 2 hours, you weren't just skating, you were part of something. Tang. Tang rode into the 1970s on a NASA-fueled wave of marketing glory and landed in nearly every kitchen cabinet. The powder came in a tin with a lid you could never open quietly. You scooped, dumped, stirred, and watched it swirl into a shade of orange that never occurred in nature. It didn't taste like juice. It tasted like orange-flavored sugar with a hint of vitamins. But kids loved it. Moms liked that it lasted forever. Dads liked that it said astronauts on the label. And kids liked that it made their tongues glow. It wasn't healthy. It wasn't fresh. But it made breakfast feel futuristic. And for a while, that was enough. School film strips. Classroom technology in the 1970s meant one thing: film strips. The teacher rolled out the projector, dimmed the lights, and hoped nothing caught fire. The machine hummed like a lawnmower. The film clicked forward one frame at a time, usually after a beep that made everyone jump. Narrators spoke in perfect monotone. Subjects ranged from safety drills to how corn becomes cereal. Nobody paid attention, but everyone stared anyway. The screen was always crooked. The volume was always too low or way too loud. And someone always asked, "Can we watch it again?" Sometimes the strip jammed. Sometimes it melted. And sometimes, if you were lucky, the bulb burned out completely and class ended early. It wasn't exciting, but it beat math. Sitting in the way back of station wagons. Before seatbelt laws and child safety ratings, the way back of a station wagon was the best seat in the house. No view of the road, just a rear-facing bench and a perfect angle to make faces at drivers behind you. Kids piled in with snacks, toys, and zero restraints. The bumps were rough, the turns were worse, and the smell of old vinyl and peanut butter hung in the air. Parents never looked back. Siblings drew invisible lines you weren't allowed to cross. Arguments broke out every 5 minutes and usually ended with a juice box to the head. There was no AC, no music, and definitely no escape. But it felt like a moving clubhouse on wheels. Dangerous? Absolutely. Unforgettable? Every time. The Charlie's Angels feathered hair. Inspired by Charlie's Angels, it required blow dryers, round brushes, and more hairspray than a fire marshal would ever approve. The goal was volume, wings that fanned out from the face like you were preparing for takeoff. Every strand had to curve just right. One wrong move, and the whole look collapsed. Boys tried it too, with mixed results. Bathrooms turned into styling war zones. Counters were covered in combs, curlers, and sticky bottles labeled maximum hold. You didn't wake up with feathered hair, you earned it. Hours of teasing, spraying, flipping, and praying in the mirror. And when it finally worked, you felt unstoppable, like a star, or at least someone who watched TV in style. Ford Pinto. The Ford Pinto looked like a harmless little car until you tapped the rear bumper. Then it turned into a fire hazard with wheels. It was small, cheap, and everywhere. Parents bought them. Teenagers inherited them. Mechanics avoided them. The Pinto had a reputation, not for speed, not for comfort, but for a gas tank design that turned fender benders into fireworks. Still, it sold like crazy. Gas was expensive, and the Pinto promised economy, even if it came with risk. Inside, it felt like a tin can with seats, plastic dashboard, sticky vinyl, and a glove box that never closed properly. But it had character. It may have been a punchline, but for a lot of people it was their first car, and they loved it anyway. 1970s gas crisis. The 1970s gas crisis hit like a bad dream. Long lines, short tempers, and out-of-gas signs slapped on every station window. Drivers sat in their cars for hours, radios off, engines off, hoping the fuel wouldn't run out before their turn. Some stations had limits. Some just shut down. People brought gas cans, argued over spots, and circled like vultures anytime a tanker truck rolled in. Carpooling wasn't a trend. It was survival. Speed limits dropped, engines idled, and every mile felt like a gamble. Families canceled trips, vacations got shorter, and compact cars suddenly looked like genius. It wasn't glamorous, but it made everyone rethink how far a gallon could take you. Slinkies. They started at the top of the stairs and never made it to the bottom the way the commercial promised. Still, we believed. Slinkies were metal coils that looked simple but felt alive. You'd place it on the first step, give it a push, and watch it tumble, sometimes gracefully, sometimes like a collapsing bridge. When it worked, it was magic. When it didn't, it twisted into a mess faster than you could blink. They stretched, bent, tangled, and never quite returned to their original shape. And once they kinked, that was the end of the road. Kids still carried them like trophies. They bounced them in their hands, dropped them on desks, and acted like they were high-tech gadgets, all for a toy that did one thing when it felt like it. Speaking Pig Latin. Every schoolyard in the 1970s had a secret language, and it wasn't very secret. Pig Latin turned ordinary sentences into a confusing mess of syllables that somehow made kids feel clever. You took the first letter, moved it to the end, added I, and suddenly you were fluent in nonsense. Let's go became Etzle Oge, and teachers just sighed. It wasn't hard, but it took practice. Lunch tables turned into decoding centers. Notes passed in class read like encrypted spy messages. The fun wasn't in keeping secrets, it was in watching adults try to keep up. It faded fast, but while it lasted, Pig Latin felt like a superpower. And for one glorious semester, everyone spoke like cartoon spies on a sugar rush. Playing record together. Music in the 1970s wasn't streamed, it was shared. You invited friends over, picked out your best vinyl, and carefully dropped the needle like it was a ceremony. Album covers became conversation pieces. Everyone took turns choosing the next side, and no one dared scratch a favorite track. The room went quiet when the first note hit. No talking during guitar solos, no skipping songs. You listened to the whole album because flipping the record took effort. Sometimes you danced. Sometimes you just sat back and stared at the ceiling. Either way, it felt like time slowed down. Speakers buzzed, floors shook, and someone always insisted their turntable sounded better. It wasn't background noise, it was the whole night. The metric system that never stuck. For a brief moment in the 1970s, America tried to go metric. Schools rolled out posters, teachers handed out rulers with centimeters, and nobody knew why inches had to die. It started slow. Road signs mentioned kilometers. Milk jugs had liters in tiny print. Thermometers got confusing. But everyone just kept using feet, gallons, and pounds, like nothing changed. Kids learned it in class, forgot it at lunch, and parents shook their heads at the idea of buying deli meat in grams. The government gave it a push, the public gave it a shrug, and the switch quietly faded away without a fight. It was a national effort that ended in collective confusion. And somehow, we still don't know how long a meter really is. Polaroid cameras. Instant photos weren't just cool, they were magic. You aimed, clicked, and out came a square that developed right in your hand. No waiting, no lab, No second chances. Polaroids made every moment feel important. Birthday cake? Snap it. New haircut? Snap it. Your dog doing anything remotely funny? Snap it twice. You shook the photo even though it didn't help. Everyone did. It was part of the ritual. The film was expensive. The colors were weird, and the focus wasn't always perfect. But none of that mattered. Photos curled at the edges, stuck to fridge doors, and lived in shoeboxes under beds for decades. Each one was a tiny time machine. Messy, honest, and frozen in that exact moment. TV sign-offs at midnight. Television didn't run forever. At midnight, the screen didn't just go dark. It said goodbye. A flag waved, an anthem played, and then came the static. The announcer's voice turned solemn. This concludes our broadcast day. No drama, no cliffhanger. Just a slow fade into snow. Sometimes they showed a montage of national parks or soaring eagles. Sometimes just color bars and a loud tone that could wake the neighborhood. It meant bedtime. It meant silence. And it meant the world had officially shut down for the night. Kids stared at the fuzz until the screen burned into their memory. Adults used it as a signal to turn in. Now, everything's always on. But back then, even TV knew when to call it a day. From lava lamps to disco jams, the 70s gave us weird, wild memories we'll never forget. Got a favorite we missed? Drop it in the comments, smash that like button, and subscribe for more nostalgia straight from the golden years.